the previous videos, we talked about the extension of time. This happens when there is a delay of the completion of work. In order to avoid the liquidated damage imposed onto the contractor, the extension of time may be applied from the architect. The architect will need to assess the reasons of the delay, whether it is valid, before granting the extension of time. Among the valid reasons has been outlined in PEN Contract 2018. There is a series of the relevant events as listed in this slide here and also here. The contractor will need to prove that it is not due to his problem leading to the delay of the work, and this has already gone beyond the contractor's control, so that the contractor is entitled for the extension of time. One of which listed in the relevant events is the force majeure. It is any circumstances beyond the control of the contractor. For example, the event caused by the terrorist acts, governmental or regulations actions, epidemics, and natural disasters. When we see the term epidemics here, the first thing come into our mind, most likely it will be COVID-19. If you search through the internet, you will see one of the frequent questions asked is COVID-19 outbreak a force majeure? I guess this is a common question asked by the contractor having the work progress badly affected by this COVID-19. The contractors are seeking for the possibility of being granted with the extension of time so that they are not being imposed with the liquidated damage. I feel this could be an interesting topic to discuss about. First, what is force majeure? These are some characteristics of the force majeures. First, it is an unforeseeable event. It is also beyond the reasonable control by the contractor. It prevents, hinders, or delay or make impossible for the contractor to perform the obligations under the contract. Some example of this kind of event, it will be the acts of gods, epidemics, natural disasters. Now come back to the question. Is COVID-19 outbreak a force majeure? Based on the information from the internet, it was said that there is no blanket rules to determine this. Although this epidemic seems to be quite relevant to COVID-19, with the word disease, epidemics, pandemics, theoretically it should be sufficient to include COVID-19 outbreak under the force majeure. However, based on the information from the internet, there is no reported case in Malaysia as to whether the outbreak falls within the scope of force majeure clause. Before we discuss further about this, let us look into the definitions of several terms. First is the epidemic, second is the pandemic, and third one is the endemic. I believe before the outbreak of COVID-19, most of us do not know what is the meaning of these terms. With better awareness in terms of the disease, thanks to the COVID-19, we can now determine the true meaning of these terminologies. Just in case that you do not know, the definitions are given here. First is the epidemic. It is an unexpected increase in the numbers of disease cases in a specific geographical areas. This is referring to the rate which are clearly above the expected occurrence in a community or region. If you look at the definition here, there are two key things. First is the abnormally high in terms of the rate. Second, it is still within a specific geographical area. Now we talk about the pandemic. It is when the disease growth is exponential. That means the spread of the disease is extremely fast. The growth rate skyrockets, and each day's case grow more than the day before. Then this is considered as the pandemic. Next, it will be the endemic. It is when the disease is consistently present but limited to a particular region, or the disease spread at a rate which is predictable. Now, the major difference between these pandemics and epidemics, it will be the rate of the spread. One is abnormally high, another one is exponential growth. The second difference, it will be whether it remains regional or it cuts across the international borders. And the difference between the pandemic and the endemic. Endemics, it will be something which is predictable and is going to be consistently present. We will have to bear with it. By looking at these three terms here, it is as is a process of this COVID-19. When it outbreaks at a certain geographical area, it is considered as the epidemic. Later, it spread quickly throughout the world. The COVID-19 becomes the pandemic. And once everything normalizes, even though the COVID-19 will consistently be around us, and now the rate of spreading is predictable, the COVID-19 might end up to be the endemic. Now the question is, why do we need to discuss about this when we talk about this force majeure? We will need to know the concept of this before we proceed with our discussions, whether COVID-19 can be considered as a force majeure, so that the contractor may claim for the extension of time. First, we can look at the characteristic of this COVID-19. It does have the characteristic of the force majeure, which we have established earlier. It is an unforeseeable event, and it is beyond the reasonable control of the contractor, and it is pandemic epidemics which bring to the shock of the entire world. In Malaysia, responding to this COVID-19, we have Malaysians Movement Control Order, or MCO. This will affect the contractors to carry out his obligations under the contract. If we view from this perspective, we can say that COVID-19 outbreak is a force majeure. However, I would say that the things might not be that straightforward. We could analyze these situations by the stages of the COVID-19 in terms of the impacts to the Malaysia. Yes, COVID-19 could be a force majeure, but we cannot blame everything to the COVID-19 for the entitlement of extension of time. Let us look at the table here. This represents different stages of the COVID-19. Let's say now when the COVID-19 is an epidemic, it first started from the other country. There was an outbreak in the other country. At that time, there was no case in Malaysia. In this case, we cannot consider this COVID-19 is a force majeure for this particular project. It is irrelevant. The obligations of the contractor is not affected by the outbreak of the COVID-19 in the other country. Therefore, the contractor is not entitled to claim for the extension of time. Then COVID-19 become a pandemic. It outbreaks in Malaysia. In order to contain it, the Malaysian government has imposed the Movement Control Orders (MCO), where the citizens of Malaysia are restricted from movement in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and this will affect the progressions of the works. As a result, the delay of the project occurs. Now this has become beyond the reasonable control of the contractor. With that, the COVID-19 at this stage can be considered as the force majeure. This is of course provided that these events that affects the obligations of the contractor was not foreseen during the signing of the contract, and the measures imposed by the government to combat this COVID-19 do prevent the party from carrying out their obligations under the contract. In another word, this is provided that it is really affecting the progressions of the work. Then the contractor is entitled for the extension of time. Later, when COVID-19 become an endemic, the things become normalized. We are in the new normal, and there will be no lockdowns. The international borders opens, and the economy by hook or by rope will still need to carry on. By then, the COVID-19 will not be considered as the force majeure under this project. The main reason is due to the predictable characteristic of this endemic. When the things become predictable, it is the obligations of the contractors to come up with the measures to overcome it. The relevant causes should have been incorporated during the tendering stage. In the case that the contractor deemed that it is impossible to complete the work on time, at the first place, contractor can choose not to bid for the project. With that, if the COVID-19 is in the endemic condition, probably this force majeure might not be applicable, and the contractor cannot use this as a reason to claim for the extension of time. Having this understood, by now you should have better understanding regarding the rationales behind this extension of time. Only we take this COVID-19 as an example to bring out the fundamentals behind this extension of time regarding the entitlement of this extension of time to the contractor. Should you encounter the other relevant event, probably the similar concept may be applied to determine the entitlement of the extension of time.